welcome to the Friday evening gala readings of the 2006 Montana Festival of the Book. I am Mark Scharouse, Executive Director of the Montana Committee for the Humanities, which sponsors this event, and through our grants and other programs, many other events like it throughout our state. It is my pleasure at this time to introduce a great supporter of Missoula and Montana culture, the Honorable John Engen, Mayor of Missoula, who will offer a welcome on behalf of the city. Mayor Engen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm used to a much more exaggerated introduction. So you'll have to forgive me, I am much more impressive than Mark suggests. So I have a few remarks I wrote this evening. But before I do that, and there's nothing that I wrote that isn't heartfelt, but you should all know that I value writing to the degree that I had the opportunity and the good fortune to approach a dear old friend to join city government and talk to us and talk with our community about what we do. And she is an exquisite writer. Ginny Merriam is sitting out here this evening, ladies and gentlemen. And if you don't know Ginny, just call me sometime and I will introduce you to one of Missoula's treasures. So. Excuse me. I wrote this myself, by the way. Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Forgive me for being a bit parochial here. But what is it about Missoula, my hometown? For some, that it is a reclaimed river, hillsides marked with giant initials, but very few houses, a backyard wilderness, a dog for every bike, and a bike for every person. Bad dancers and great bartenders. A university, was that a hiss? I'm the bad dancer. A university, a park, a parent, a child, a bear. An idea or an ideal. But there is something about the place and the people. And I think much of that has something to do with the filters, the many, the magnificent filters, the prisms, through whom we come to better understand where and who we are. Writers, some refugees and some just relentless, some firmly planted and others just hanging on, spend minutes, hours, days, or lifetimes considering this place. And even when they're not writing about Missoula, they are writing about Missoula. Somewhere along the line, the Wild West gave way to Walmart. By the way, that's where that belonged. And the Smith Corona succumbed to Hewlett Packard. But our community of writers won't let us lose the big sky's big picture, even while considering its smallest details. From barrel-chested, rosy-nosed crime novelists to tender souls firmly embracing trees. To tiny, brittle-boned women with enormous souls and plenty to say. We are blessed by words and wisdom. It's okay to applaud there. This place, my place, is better for what writers write and what you and I read. As we celebrate Missoula, we celebrate books. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Festival of the Book in Missoula, Montana, my hometown. And thank you for all that you do.
And I'm pleased to announce that our Gala readers next year will be Barry Lopez and John Ingen. Thank you, Mayor Ingen, and thank you for your support of the festival. Wait a second. I feel a buzzing. Yes? Right. Good, thank you. I'm supposed to remind you now to turn off your cell phones. And I also should remind you that there's a guy named Ron right out there who has a camera. He's videotaping this entire proceeding. If you're not sitting with someone that you want to be photographed with while you're here, now would be a good time to change places. The Montana Festival of the Book would not be possible without the assistance of numerous individuals and organizations, and I would like to thank first the more than 100 writers and panelists who are appearing at this year's festival. Many have traveled great distances. And all of them are here for their love and their commitment to their art and to their readers, and we sincerely appreciate their support of the festival. Among the organizations that support us are, of course, our parent, National Endowment for the Humanities, but also the Paul Allen Family Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Charles Engelhardt Foundation, the Montana Arts Council, the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies, and of course, the Missoulian. Many other local individuals, merchants, and organizations that are listed on this evening's program support the festival in a great variety of ways, and to them we're also grateful. Special among them are the 4 Missoula bookstores: Fact and Fiction, Shakespeare and Company, Barnes & Noble, the bookstore at the University of Montana, who constitute the festival bookstore and who make our authors' books available to festival goers. I know of no other book festival in the nation where there is such a good-spirited and generous support for a common cause. Both of tonight's Gala readers will be available for signing and for conversation in the theater lobby at the conclusion of this evening's performance. Their books will be on sale there also. Recognition and thanks are also due to photographer Tony Cesare and Montana Librarian of the Year Gloria Curdy for this year's festival poster. The Montana Festival of the Book would not be possible also without the devotion and work of the staff of the Montana Committee for the Humanities, Yvonne Gritzner, Ken Stoltz, and above all, Festival Coordinator Kim Anderson. Kim is out there somewhere. In addition, Judy Klein, Pamela Burke, and Susan Carlson help us immensely with the festival every year, and we're grateful for their dedication and hard work as well. A number of wonderful volunteers do important work for the festival, most notably MCH board members, past and present. Nikki Wardy, Jim Driscoll, Corby Skinner, Deirdre Shaw, and Alan Weltzing. And they and other volunteers also have our sincere gratitude. And lastly, we thank readers like you who support the festival with your attendance and your generous donations. We will thank you ever more if you make just one more stop by the donation box this evening in the lobby. It is with sadness every year that we note the passing of members of Montana's literary community. Patricia Gerdicke was a poet of national stature, whose thoughts and words enlightened us and pleased us, and whose presence in Montana and at this festival honored us. Dave Walter, the research historian of the Montana Historical Society, wrote many books of Montana history, and for 30 years served the community of Western historians as well as anyone ever has. Through his scholarship and his gentle wit, he reminded us that not all history is of wars and politics and generals and victories. We are the poorer now without both of them. A happier tradition of our festival is that of announcing the winner of the annual Happy Tales Literary Contest. The contest asks writers to supply happy endings to works in need of them. And in the past 6 years, we have worked diligently to improve the writings of William Shakespeare, Ernest Hemingway, Norman MacLean, Ernest Hemingway, Arthur Miller, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, and many others, including Ernest Hemingway. What is it about writing parodies of Hemingway, I wonder? Doesn't he have his own contest? In any case, the winner of the Happy Tales contest receives both a modest, very modest, stipend and the coveted, prestigious Nahum Tate Cup. Nahum Tate, as you all surely know, was the 18th century poet laureate who rewrote King Lear, and whose happy ending to that play was the official version performed in the British Isles for the next century or more. For 2006, the winner of the coveted, prestigious Nahum Tate Cup is, drum roll please, drum roll, Mr. Dennis Held of Spokane, Washington, for his clever, insightful, and happy new poem, Degrees of Joy in Phillipsburg. Our congratulations to Mr. Held, and also to the late Richard Hugo, whose name will now be inscribed on this most singular of literary lists, alongside Ernest Hemingway. I understand incidentally that the Phillipsburg Chamber of Commerce has already nominated Mr. Held to become Poet Laureate of Granite County. And now it's my pleasure to introduce novelist and essayist David James Duncan, the author of The River Why, The Brothers Kay, My Life as Told by Water, and most recently, God Laughs and Plays, who will introduce William Kittredge. Please welcome David James Duncan.
The last time I was this glad to be given an introduction was in Portland in 1993, where I served as MC for a fundraiser to benefit the lending library in Bumtown. Since Portland's literary indigent people didn't always get it together to return the books they borrowed, Oregon's Republican Brain Trust had decided to spank them hard by eliminating their library altogether. Up those indigent people's ass with mobile gas, as Kilgore Trout used to say. It's true, writing a book with God and the title didn't help me. I still have a terrible case of RITS, Republican-induced Tourette syndrome. The Republicans among us should know I'm bipartisan. I have a pretty bad case of DITS, too. The three readers I had to introduce in Bumtown were the late, great Ken Kesey, author of Sometimes a Great Notion; Catherine Dunn, author of The Indescribably Strange and Wonderful Geek Love; and Jean Ahl, author of Climb of the Cave Bear. Put yourself in my moccasins here, folks. Imagine yourself trying to stand up and say something cogent to the fans and to the face of Ken Electric Kool-Aid Kesey, to the very different fans and face of the circus groupie, sword swallower, bard of geeks and boxers, Catherine Dunn, then to the infinitely more staid fans and face of Jean Ahl, a globally best-selling gazillionaire grandma in love with fantasizing about cave people, whose fantasies, by the way, I'd never read. I don't know whether we rose or sank to the occasion, but we dubbed the reading Clan of the Geek Cave Bear. We packed the house despite the Trailblazer game and David Byrne concert next door. And to the dismay of Oregon Republicans, we shot no mobile gas up any poor person's ass. The indigents of Portland's Bumtown remain unusually well-read to this day. If I were emceeing tonight's doubleheader, I might have dubbed it something like Bucking the Hole in the House of Sky. So it's a damn good thing I'm not emceeing. I'm just introducing a man we can all from now on call not just our friend William Kittredge, or the writer and thinker Bill Kittredge, or the Western bard and sage, or the gin-loving bon vivant, or the golf-fiend socialite and occasional boulevardier, or the guy out on the freezing cold porch with the cigarettes and crumbly. But listen up now, the novelist William Kittredge. I also like the first-time novelist who at age 74 crushed it clean out of the yard, William Kittredge. The Willow Field makes me happy for 80 reasons, and time is time, so I must ignore 75 reasons and confine myself to 5. First reason Bill's novel makes me happy. A writer, say both William Faulkner and Peter Matheson, is only given so much lyricism in a lifetime. And around the age of 70, say both men, they begin to run out. In The Willow Field, I'm here to tell you the lyricism of William Kittredge doesn't even hint at running out. This guy's sentences are music. Second reason Bill's novel makes me happy, Richard Ford calls The Willow Field the book Kittredge was most meant to write. Ford said this knowing owning it all, and a hole in the sky, and who owns the West, and the nature of generosity, all masterpieces of a kind. What does that say of the novel we're about to hear from? I have no better advice than read it and see. Third reason Bill's novel makes me happy, I love private jokes and private evocations of uncontainable love leaking out into broad daylight on one's pages. Private love leaks like Eliza Benasco, a gray-eyed woman of Scottish descent, her tangle of white hair like a flag. Sound like anybody we know? And private joke leaks like, Wilma was soon pregnant. In the winter of 1956, she bore twins, named Max and Leo, but Rossi would soon be calling them Rack and Ruin as they rolled through the house like bear cubs, upsetting chairs and babbling a semi-private patois. Andrew, you and Alex still speaking that patois? Fourth reason Bill's novel makes me happy. The title of Bill's great nonfiction book, The Nature of Generosity, in the words of Jim Dodge, this is a quote, kind of sucks canal water up its ass with a soda straw. Gotta love Jim Dodge. But it's not an abstract title. It's not hot air. The author who deployed that title has written more blurbs and more letters of recommendation, commendation, and emendation, and offered more great gratis advice, and sat on more august panels, and connected more writers to agents and editors, and encircled us in his and Onyx friendship and food and great good humor and drink, and done more favors for more people in this room, arguably, but not very arguably, than every other writer in this room put together. And I believe in karma and karmic debt, so it made me very happy to get to write for the Blurbmeister and favor giver himself a couple letters and a blurb on behalf of the Willow Field. The fifth and last reason I'm happy, nobody ever takes my advice, partly because unless I'm drinking single malt scotch, I seldom give any. But a few years back in the sunlit backyard of James and Lois Welch, William Kittredge and I sat listening to Rattlesnake Creek and sipping a little something on the dual occasion of Bill having survived a serious major surgery and having retired from teaching. When I asked what he was up to now, Bill allowed that he would like to be writing a novel, but added, I just can't do it. 25 years of teaching made me too goddamn didactic. It makes me happy that in my hand at that moment was a sizable single malt, and that Duncan chromosomes too are Scottish, and though I can't explain the metaphysics or the chemistry, that malt and I told Bill straight away that he was talking bullshit. We then professed to the old professor, reminding the fiction maker and us both that fiction, just like nonfiction, is built word by word of sentences that make surprising jumps, but then turn out to connect by the end of the graph. It's built of hauntings, and shadows, and shards of dark and bright history. It's built of overheard intimacies, slow amazements, sexual improprieties, sudden usurpations of thought. It's built of sight, sounds, insinuations, feelings, smells, songs, and image after image that stick out in memory, then up off the page the way bits of heather stick out of the wool in a handmade Irish sweater. And your prose, Bill, your recent prose, I told him that day, is so loaded with all this good, unteachable that I find myself pissed at anything, including even you, that would delay the day I get to sit down and read the jumping, connecting, haunted, heather-roughened wool sweater of a novel I see lurking in your nonfiction. It makes me happy that Bill Kittredge eyed me and my single malt with some surprise, and finished his gin and cigarette, went home, and by damn wrote that very novel. The Willow Field even includes the single malt. Ladies and gentlemen, still standing, still swinging a mean club, and still lyrical at age 74, welcome our marvelously flawed hero and hugely generous friend, the novelist William Kittredge.
Well, thank you. That's all I've got to say. Let's get out of here. Thank you, David. I don't know what to do about that, but God bless your heart for doing it. I want to read, I think, 4 sections of this novel scattered around. I never had a novel before, so I don't quite know how to read from one. So I could have read one long section, but I think I'll try to give some sense of the book. It's a novel about a boy who grows up in Nevada and takes off, goes to Montana at the age of 19, driving 200, with some other men, driving 257 head of horses from Eagleville, California to Calgary. Meets a woman, well, he's escaping a woman when he goes, and he meets another woman up there and falls in love. And the majority of the book is about a 40 or 50-year love affair. It starts in 1934, ends in 1991, so I guess it's more than 40 years, 50 years. I actually was more cowardly than either David or the mayor. I kind of edited and didn't read things I thought might offend someone. But people have children here or something, you know? Anyway, this is kind of like tamer stuff. So they're driving horses north in the middle of eastern Oregon where I grew up, and these 5 guys and their 257 head of horses. This section, the whole thing will take about 30, 35 minutes. The next afternoon, they went out across Catlow Valley, a 50-mile swale where homesteaders had come to the west in response to railroad promotions in the years before the First World War, had settled and plowed up 160-acre plots and planted rye and failed. The valley was bare, no sign of the 11 post office towns that had once been there, nor any of the saw lumber houses, just rusting barbed wire, snarled around fields going back to brush. Jap Hardy led them miles to the west, across the flanks of the Beatty Buttes, in order to stay out of that wire. Camped beside a spring and a draw called East Road Gulch, Louis Clare killed 3 rattlesnakes, he's the cook, as he set up the cook tent. He smiled for the first time Rossi had seen as he laid the steaks out on the table where he did his cutting and bread baking. "You boys be careful," he said to Rossi, "you might find snakes in your bed." "You gonna cook them sons of bitches?" Tars Whistle asked. "I could. You want snake? I'd cook snake. I've tasted snake, sort of like rubber." But he just cut off the rows of rattles, stowed them in the drawer with the knives and forks, and tossed the thick, limber bodies off into the brush. The 10,000-foot fault block of Steens Mountain under snow in late April glowed off east in the twilight. Dickie Wilson cleared his throat and told them about riding a bicycle a couple of 100 miles on desert roads north from Elko to hunt work as a Rango for the White Horse Ranch beyond the Steens when he was 16. The White Horse cowhands told him German dogs came off the mountains at night, Donner and Blitzen, phantom dogs, and he had stayed awake listening for noises when they were all of them sleeping. "If them wasn't the damnedest fellows," Dickie Wilson said. Toward the foot of the Steens, they passed Blitzen, the last temporary remnant of a town left in Catlow, comprised of collapsing shiplap houses and a store with a wall slumping in on itself. 3 women and a man with braided red hair came out to see them pass. "They think we're going someplace," Tars Witzel said. Bill Sweet, he's a young kid, was hanging behind Witzel, as he liked to do, listening. "Compared to here, we're going to heaven." They led the Pinto Bell mare through a gate in the meadows at Roaring Springs. The cows had been sold off, with nobody there except for the man who had overseen the selling, an old-time cow boss turned into a whiskery fellow in a food-stained shirt who kept the fences mended. They camped beside the Roaring Springs bunkhouse, where Jap Hardy had lived in years past. Tars Witzel stood on the porch, began stripping out of his shirt. Me, he said, I'm taking one of them baths. Buck naked and pale, they gimped and tromped through the skunk cabbage beside the bunkhouse and splashed into snow-cold spring water, bumbling into a sand-bottom pool where they soaped themselves and plunged their heads again and again before clambering out to dry off with a cast-iron stove Louis Clare had fired up in the bunkhouse bullpen. Into his dusty road clothes again, Jap Hardy favored Bill Sweet with a slap on the shoulder. By God, kid, you got it right. This here's heaven. Damn sight colder and cleaner than Blitzen. I always figured heaven was cold and clean. Could be, Tars Witzel said, that it's really slick and pink. After loping, sorry. That's the first sign of scatology. See, I'm being very. There's more. After loafing over breakfast the next morning, they went a dozen miles along the foothills of the mountain before cresting a lava ridge to sit looking down on the wide swampland valley and home fields of the old P Ranch. The valley was intricately cut by creek waters flowing from the Steens through a canyon that was 3,000 foot deep, one of 5 such formations eroded into the mountain. Cut into the rock by glaciers, Tars Witzel said, gospel truth, that's what school teachers say, if you believe them school teachers. Pete French had set up the P Ranch in 1872 after driving cattle into the country from California, Jap Hardy explained. He reined in and sat looking. There she is, French and his vaqueros trailing cows all the way from Red Bluff. They didn't know this valley was here, and there it was, empty for the taking. French was 23, Tars Witzel said. You young fellas better get a hurry on. Jap Hardy shook his head. This whole country was dead empty. Now the federal government is buying the swamp for a bird refuge. That's what they say. Hard to think about. Birds. They was Indians, Bill Sweet said in his know-it-all way. They was always Indians. A lot of years before French. But French, he probably run them off. The horses streamed past the French Glen Hotel, framed by Lombardy poplar, and just like the one in Eagleville from its looks, and out of Fence Lane to a small field where the main P Ranch house had burned down to nothing but chimneys and a grassy lot. No money for hotels, Jap Hardy said, once they had done with the evening meal, but there's $1 or $2 for beer. There's not going to be any women for you boys, but we ain't lost a horse, and that's worth something, so we'll spend Dufferina's money on beer. You fellas think you could drink a beer? Lewis Clark claimed he didn't drink, and that he was honor bound to make sure the Scottish Rango boy didn't either. Promised his daddy. I could drink a dozen, Bill Sweet said. I'll drink yours. 2 beers, Jap Hardy said, 2 or 3. The gray-eyed woman running the hotel studied them, then nodded. I got a case and a half, that's it. She snapped caps off the bottles, handed them out, and then stayed in her kitchen while they drank the first round. There was a ring on her finger, but no sign of a husband. Kind of shy, that woman, Tars Witzel said, don't blame her. But then it was time for a second, but when it was time for a second round, she opened one for herself and came into the lobby where they were sitting quietly, nobody saying a thing. Where are you headed, she asked. Calgary, Rossi said, but she wasn't asking him, didn't even look at him. Who owns them horses, she asked Jap Hardy. Man named Dufferina out of Reno. They're California horses going to the Mounties in Canada. Rich man's horses. Why would the Mounties be buying California horses? Don't know about that, but they're mine until we get there. What you ought to do is make off with them, sell the outfit and split the money. That'd teach them rich bastards a lesson. Jap Hardy shook his head. You hear that kind of talk? That mining camp talk about steal the prize. But who in the hell would buy that many horses? You chicken. Why don't you be our ringleader? Tars Witzel cut in, laughing at his jokes. I'd do it, the woman said. She didn't smile at all. Show them bastards a little justice. I wouldn't put my money on justice, Tars Witzel said, laughing again. You laugh at me one more time and this beer drinking is over. Oh hell, it was just getting started. Yeah, she said, to hell with it. She raised her bottle. Here we are. I'll drink to you boys, you brought the horses. You got any playing cards, Jap Hardy asked? There, she said. That's the idea. So they sat playing hands of pinochle until the beer was gone. As they went down out of the darkness to their horses, the woman stood on the lighted porch. You boys, she said, and closed the door. By noon the next day, they'd crossed a boggy narrows, the Donner and Blitzen swamp. Beyond that, to the east, they approached a round barn with a conical roof that looked stranded like a ship left over from an old story, isolated as it was on a knoll among the sage hills. They herded the horses into a fence corner and held them quiet. "You young fellas," Jap Hardy said, "this you ought to see. There was corrals and a cookhouse, but they've been torn down, so all we got left is this barn." He sat on an orangey red gelding, eyeing Rossi and Bill Sweet, like one of them might have some dumb thing to say. "Been here 4 times, he said, "this makes 5. "You take them boys in there," Tars Witzel said. "Dickie and me will keep these horses herded." Double wide doors in the board and batten wall creaked as they were pulled back to reveal a circular track, and inside that a mortared stone wall 8 or so feet high, in the exact center of the interior corral, a juniper post burnished by ropes from years of men snubbing horses supported a conical roof where the rafters came together like at the apex, like spokes in a wheel. Noontime light drifted in through a circle of ports in a high octagonal cupola and lay over the reddish interior woods like dust. You think of Pete French building that stone wall as a fort against the Indians and those Mexican boys from California chewing their snoots and gentling horses all winter, Jap Hardy said. French took care that his hands was out of the winter. He was alone and afoot if they left him. Rossi ran his fingertips down the center post. "If you wanted a church," Jap Hardy said, "this would be it. French hated all them barbed wire boys, settlers. One of them shot him, ruined the country." All through the rest of his life, Rossi would tell the story of Peter French and the Mexican vaqueros and their kingdom ranch in that faraway valley, and the round barn Peter French had built so his men could work with their horses in the wintertime out of the weather. That's the end of that section. The part I'm going to read now is a short piece about Rossi meeting the woman who's going to be the love of his life, Eliza Stevenson. They're up camped on the edge of the Bow River, south of Calgary, just out of Calgary, waiting for the guy who owns the horses to come. They're waiting. They got to wait about 3 days. They're a little bit ahead of time. This is about another 50 pages later. Come morning, his pinto horse turned loose to roll in the dust. Rossi he'd been, riding all through the night, kind of watching out for somebody might steal their horses, although nobody makes a pass at it at all. Rossi was cradling a cup of coffee by the cook fire when a rider on a shaggy white mare approached over the prairie, pushing back a sweat-stained hat. The rider turned out to be a hawk-faced girl in a pale blouse and baggy black trousers. Rossi took her for Indian until he saw her gray eyes. She spoke in a clipped way from astride her horse. "I have come to appeal for breakfast on the hope that you have bacon. I can pay for breakfast if you have bacon, thick and crisp fried." She lifted her chin at Rossi. "Thought you was an Indian," he said. She studied him. "You're the one who might be from your coloring." "Guess I should get a haircut," he said. "What I am is half Basque. From Spain, but nobody calls us Spaniards. My grandfather was a dockhand in Spain. My father is a card sharp in Reno. European." She considered this. "You look like a card sharp." Rossi had dug out his white-handled knife and was peeling away a wisp of thumbnail. Why, he didn't know. "The Blackfoot tribe and I, we're outlaws," she said. "We know abandonment." "Abandonment?" Rossi said. "Do you think about saying that stuff before you say it?" Her smile hardened, though she looked reluctantly amused. "Aren't you an ass?" It was not a question. Jap Hardy stepped in front of Rossi, one hand up, palm open. "You gotta forgive this boy, been on the trail and lost his manners. Get down and we'll give you bacon." He gave Rossi a sideways look, like this was a joke between men. "We got a cook to fry it up, that's his job." The girl swung off the shaggy mare. She was almost as tall as Rossi, holding out the bridle reins in her big hands. "If you was going to be a gentleman, you'd do something with my horse. Her name is Sky. Will she stand?" "She will." "So you could just drop the reins anywhere and she'd stand like a cow horse. Something you could do for yourself if I wasn't busy being a gentleman." "Of course." "But will you do it for me?" "Sure will." Rossi took the bridle reins and led the mare off to the Model A truck, dropping the reins over the front bumper. "There she stands." "Thank you." She smiled with what seemed to be no trace of irony. "Louis," Jap Hardy said, "we got company. Break out the bacon, and you can mix up some pancakes. We got plenty of time. We ain't doing nothing but entertaining this lady." Lewis Clare produced a slab of bacon, and Angus Jackson, the chore boy, bit at his tongue as he labored to slice it evenly. "My name is Eliza Stevenson," the girl said to him. "Tell me yours." "Angus." "And you?" She smiled at Lewis as he mixed the pancake batter. "My people," Lewis Clare said, "understand that food is a sacrament." Tars Witzel was eyeing Lewis like he thought the cook had gone crazy. "You saying a sacrament? What about women? It'd be a big thing for me if women was at church. That way I'd have spent my life dreaming about church." "Angus," she said, "you must be Scottish." "My mother come from the Hebrides Island," the boy said, "when she was a baby child." "What of your father?" The boy stopped sawing at the sight of bacon, swallowing before he spoke. "Nobody knows, not even my mother, according to what she claims. Tragic." "You feel your life is tragic?" "Lady, I'm supposed to be cutting bacon. My last name is Jackson. My mother says she just made that up." "My father," she said, "is related to Robert Louis Stevenson. The Stevensons are a Scottish family you may know about. That's what my father claims, but I don't believe him." "Why is that?" Rossi asked. Eliza Stevenson smiled faintly, then raised her eyebrows. "He's unreliable, spoiled and unreliable." Bacon and pancakes and a dozen eggs sizzled on a griddle over the fire. The table with sawhorse legs was set up with butter and canned syrup, while Lewis Clare filled each tin plate. "Here we are with bacon, breakfasting," Eliza Stevenson said. "Isn't this a holiday?" "I'm glad you come," Tars Witzel said, dropping his slick tin plate into the wash basin where hot water was steaming on the grill. "We don't get to eat this fine every morning." "It's not an easy thing to cook over an open fire," Lewis Clare said. "By God, no," Jap Hardy said. "We're damn proud of you, Lewis. Ask anybody." Tars Witzel turned toward Eliza Stevenson. "So, you might settle me a mystery. What are you doing here on these plains? Who's looking after you when Lewis isn't cooking?" "Nobody looks after me. Nobody but me." It didn't seem to be a subject she intended to pursue. "All of you should come to my gathering. It's on Sunday." "Too bad," Jap Hardy said. "We'll be on the train out of Calgary." "Some church thing?" Rossi said. "It's a party with friends. My friends are blood Indians. You look like an Indian, so you'd be comfortable. A going-away party." She broke into a phrase of song, her voice high, light, and clear. "Fare thee well, little darling." She smiled. "I'm going home to the Bitterroot Valley because I'm 3 months with child, and the father has run off to the warrior life, and my own father tells me he's dying of cancer, my second reason for going home." "That cancer's a hell of a thing," Tars Witzel said. "I'm taking the Canadian Pacific Railroad to Vancouver," she said, "and a train to Seattle and then Missoula. I'm going to my father's house in the Bitterroot Valley, where my father and mother will look after me, don't mistake it, and my child." "What sort of a cancer?" Jap Hardy asked. "In his groin, where he sits. A slow cancer. It doesn't pain him yet, but he says it inevitably kills. The doctor tells him that, and he won't have it cut out." She looked up, and her gray eyes were dry and still. "My daddy had that damned old agony," Tars Witzel said, "set on a feather pillow at the end. And I'll be a pregnant woman on the train," she said. "Woman," Rossi said, "you're a girl." "Whatever we are," she said, "sweethearts. We could be sweethearts in another world. That's a wonderful idea." She batted her gray eyes, not morose at all, but at sport in her flirting. And that's the end of their first confrontation. They get together. Rossi pursues her down into the Bitterroot. They get married. She has the child that she's pregnant with. And about 7 or 8 months go by. And I'm going to read you a little darker section. It's called Deer Lodge. In February of 1935, the baby is old enough to be carried around and moved about, and Eliza decides she wants to go see the baby's husband, who's locked up in prison in Deer Lodge for having almost beat a farmer in Great Falls to death. I won't say anything about that. Might not be a bad idea. They're talking about him. "Berserk isn't crazy," Eliza said, "or evil. Berserk is overwhelmed by fury or sorrow." She turned to Rossi. "This is nothing about you, but you're coming with me. You're my husband. Where are you going?" "To see him." She looked away from Rossi like he was not so much dense as beside the point. 3 mornings later, Rossi and Eliza and the baby were driven to catch the eastbound train from Missoula, which they would ride to Deer Lodge. Eliza would show her baby to his blood father. Arrangements had been made. The prison resembled a stone castle with crenellated rock walls and guard towers 3 stories above the main street of what otherwise looked to be a Montana rancher's town, with a scattering of black automobiles parked diagonally to the concrete curbs and women idling at their shopping in a food market, but almost no men on this working day. You and me, Rossi said, holding Eliza by the elbow and shuffling the icy sidewalk in black rubber galoshes. You carrying that baby, we could be just about anybody. We are, Eliza said. Inside the first gate, they were shown into separate rooms and searched. A tall, gray-faced guard with watery, brown-flecked eyes grew suspicious when Rossi fished up his knife. The man snapped the main blade open and tested it with his thumb. That's an implement you don't take with you, the guard said. Blades like that of sliced jugulars in here will hold it. You keep an eye on it, Rossi said. I'll try. You better, otherwise there's me. What's that to mean? Same thing it always means. Are you threatening me? Rossi looked away. He had meant to threaten the man. Sorry, he said. This place gives me the skitters. Worse than that if you get caught threatening officials, but no mind. It happens with you fellows. You lose your balance. Escorted through a series of changing, clanging gates the guards opened with antique keys. Rossi followed Eliza down echoing chambers to more gates, and eventually into Charlie Cooper's presence. Charlie Cooper is the man who fathered her child. They were directed to sit on a bare bench in a cramped chamber, facing a portal blocked by steel bars that separated them from a rock-walled room. Charlie Cooper sat well back in the isolated center of the holding cell. A uniformed guard with smooth jowls, absorbed in a pulp magazine called Western Action, sent looking down onto Charlie from a third chamber. Do not pass anything back and forth, he said in a quiet voice, then turned back to his raggedy magazine. Charlie Cooper was indeed the man in the photographs Rossi had seen, except that his head had been shaved. On the side of his skull, a tiny swirl of tattoo depicted a dark feathered bird spreading its wings above his left ear. Here he is, Eliza said, displaying the baby, your son. We named him after Teddy Blue. Charlie Cooper shook his head. Black and blue, he's not mine, he's yours. A quarter breed will wish he was pure. You see me, you see my eyes open, you see I'm past hating, I'll be out, I'll want to be dealt a hand. Pure, Eliza said, pure white, that's what he'll want, unless he's crazy. Would you like to kiss him, Eliza offered? I imagine you kissing him. The guard looked up from his reading. Not allowed. They think I might bite him, Charlie Cooper said. They think I'm a wolf. He smiled as if this was something he'd been waiting to announce. My son someday will love me and kiss me. You'll see it. Under these floors, they lock me in alone. I tell myself stories about fishing with my mother and grandfather, kicking goose, and cooking trout with onions and spuds. I wash the frying pan. The story lasts all night. Charlie's eyes flashed with amusement. Dog time. Everybody does dog time. He looked to Rossi. You got her, and I got dreams about onions and spuds, but you're the same as me. Trying to be our own luck, Rossi said, because he needed to say something. Most things don't amount to a we know that. They don't amount to a damn. You want to be my friend, Charlie Cooper said, but you don't know anything. How could you? You don't see anybody who don't love you. He spread out his hands. One day I'll be out. You'll see me. What's that bird mean, Rossi said, on your skull? It means I'm not like you. You're just like us, Eliza said. Nope, in here, we're junkyard people, dead if we do and dead if we don't. I brought money, Eliza said. Thought you would, that's your job. We're not stupid. Some of us have been counting on your money as soon as I heard you were coming. I told people, she's money in the bank. How much? Eliza folded 3 $10 bills together and tossed them inside the bars, where they floated on the concrete floor. That's handsome, Charlie stood and bowed. That's it? Enough? Sit, the guard said. Abruptly, Charlie crouched on his knees, head down, as if he might be ill. The guard laid down his reading. Back on the bench, he said. Sit. Charlie looked up. I'm praying. Sit. I'm praying you can swallow shit. Charlie came to his feet, poised there a moment with hands down in his trousers, then growled and charged toward the guard in his barred window. He fished a toilet paper roll filled with out of his pants as he crouched, and it was he was hurling, splattering on the walls and even on the guard. A clanging bell was ringing, and baby Teddy began to shriek. 3 men in yellow shirts banged the door open and rushed in, cautious for a moment as they eyed Charlie, before one of them circled around to tackle him on the slick concrete floor, and the others battered him with lead-weighted saps until he went quiet, and Rossi thought he was dead. Blood streamed from his shaved head as they dragged him, his skull just bouncing on the floor, trailing blood. When the steel door slammed behind him, Rossi found himself standing, grasping the bars, while Eliza clutched her wailing baby, and the guard mopped at his long face. A stocky man sporting a dark buttoned-up suit and a thin necktie had come into the room behind him. "Out of here," he said. His hand felt hard as iron when he took hold of Rossi's arm, and they went out before him, as Eliza said later, like lambs. The warden escorted them along the echoing concrete hallways. "Don't come back," he told them. "They got to get me my knife," Rossi said. At the entrance, a different guard handed the knife to the warden, who leered at Rossi. "This it?" Rossi nodded, but when he reached for the knife, the warden opened the long blade and tested it on his thumb, then moved to a doorway, slipped the blade into the crack between the door and the jamb, and snapped it off. "Illegal weapon," he said, offering Rossi the ruined boat handle of what remained. "What do you think of that?" Rossi said. There was not a thing to do but throw a fit, and then he'd be in there with Charlie. "You taught me a lesson," he said finally. "Never trust no jailer." "I do anything necessary," the man said. "You keep that in mind. But you're a civilized man. What does civilized mean? Chicken?" The jailer smiled. "It means you're too sensible to cut your own throat when you'd like to be cutting mine. Chicken." "Me," Eliza said, as they paused in the icy snow outside Deer Lodge prison. "I'm going to be ready when Charlie comes." Her face was pale in the snowy gray light. "We'll be barricaded." After they'd walked a block toward the railway station, she stopped again. "Our hearts ought to be broken. You've seen a man who's been overwhelmed, where it gets him." "Them walls," Rossi said, "jailers, they lead dead lives." He knew this sounded pathetic and insufficient. They waited 3 hours at the Deer Lodge station, in silence broken only when the baby whimpered and Eliza gave comfort. On the clacking ride home, Rossi dreamed of horses going under a flashing storm, and awoke as the train began clattering beside the Clark Fork, approaching Missoula. "I was dreaming about horses," he told Eliza. "Horses going back. You sound like you lost something. Boy on a train. We saw something awful," she said. "And we don't know the cure," Rossi thought, "or how much we should give it." Before midnight, they were off the train and checked into a room in the Florence Hotel, a room overlooking Higgins Avenue and the frozen Clark Fork River. Toward daybreak, while Eliza and the baby were sleeping, Rossi stood looking out the snow blowing along the cold streets and down the icy river in waves, and tried to recall exactly how stocking-footed bays and the blacks and sorrels and blue roans looked on that dew-heavy morning, grazing in the willow fields outside Eagleville. And I'll read you one more little section. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to read it. I mean, a lot of years go by now. Try 40. And this is really a book about their love affair. And all kinds of things happen, of course. 40 years. You got to do something. Believe me, I was 40. Maybe not so much happened to me, but it's happened to them. You know, there's a war in the Pacific. They live in Honolulu for a while. Rossi gets shot on Guam. All kinds of things happen. They raise kids. They do all this. In Hawaii, for the first time in nearly 4 decades, Eliza retreated to her rustic cabin after a day-long hike in the dry crater on Maui. She sat cross-legged on the floor. They also get prosperous. Sipping Pinot Noir from a plastic cup, and wrote in her journal of ideas she'd been encountering in D.H. Lawrence for years. Until now, at 69, she had never considered them foremost in her mind. The Lawrence quote, "The worth of marriage lies in disillusionment. Marriage confounds and delivers us into the reality of solitude, natural separateness, to discover the true nature of intimacy." The next day, when she read this aloud to the women she was hiking with, and a younger one asked if she had ever said such things to Rossi, Eliza rolled her eyes. Why? They said he was a failure at ideas, so he went back to being a boy with horses. It's easy to say horses are a game, but for him it's life. He says it's his last turn at bat. They're all boys, aren't they? Another woman said. They had stopped for a picnic on Waikamo Ridge, and Eliza, with good humor, even eagerness, poured herself another glass of wine and raised it to her companions. We'll get our turns at bat, do you think? In the meantime, while Eliza traveled the islands, Rossi was towing an empty horse trailer behind his Cadillac. On back roads across the San Joaquin Valley, he played the music of that countryside, a tape of Merle Haggard lamentations he'd found at a truck stop before turning off the interstate south of Tracy. Bellowing along with Tulare dust and shopping for dresses, and they're tearing the labor camps down. He made his way into the Tulare Basin, the dusty cotton field of what had been one of the largest lakes in the far west before it was drained for agriculture. If you could call cotton a kind of agriculture, he thought. He had driven south from Montana to pick up a quick little roping horse named Blue, a creature of 21 years and the best horse he'd ever bred and trained. Blue was old for a horse, but still sound in the legs after all the cross-country travel to rodeos. The man who owned him and had retired him was a farmer and a Saturday roper named Ben Ambler, and he told Rossi on the telephone that Blue wasn't for sale, but Rossi could have him. He was the one man who could. I won't ride him, Rossi said. I'm heavy for that little old horse, but my wife might. The price was one fresh mint silver dollar. I'd mount that shiny dollar on a plaque, Ben Ambler said. Show up with a trailer, that Blue horse is yours. I'll worry about him out in them empty cotton fields. There's nothing to occupy the mind in cotton country if you don't have work. He's just out there thinking and remembering. Good horses, they don't forget anything. The faint snowy Sierras shone on the eastern horizon like spooks of mountains on the moon as Rossi drifted past great empty wintertime cotton fields and an endless scatter of rigs pumping oil. That night he put up in a plank-walled hotel in a field workers' town, across the broken highway in a tavern. He sat alone at a table, listening to the rhythms of Mexican talk from the bar as he ate chicken fried steak, drank cans of Blitz, and counted his blessings. But for the grace of Eliza, he thought he might have centered his life in this dusty, faraway son of a flatland instead of Montana. The Blue horse, roan horse, Blue, I'm getting tired, was abruptly alert when Rossi approached the next morning, recognizing maybe his odor or his demeanor. As Rossi stepped forward with a halter in his hand, Blue watched, twitching his ears forward, but showing no sign of suspicion. You're right, Rossi said. They don't forget a damn thing. You got him, Ben Ambler croaked. He was a broken-fingered old fellow leaning over a steelwork fence. Rossi handed over the single silver dollar. Too bad that horse can't talk, Ambler said. We could run him for president. I tried that, Rossi said. Made me crazy. Running for president? Was you already crazy? Politics. I made a sorry show of it. Anybody would, Ben Ambler said. What politics we got around here is the Boswell family, mountain to mountain. The Boswells run politics. They showed up in the 20s, and old man Boswell brought out the Portuguese farmers along the Curd River during the Depression. Myself, I worked for the Boswells for 30 years, hired and fired Mexicans and paid for this property. He shook his head. There's no way of accounting for what's wrong with the rich boys. They set themselves up like little kings. Boswell brought in the federal government, had them dam the Kern River and dry the lake for farming. It was a wall-to-wall crime. Fields started blowing selenium. I'm pleased to see you take that horse out of here. He don't deserve selenium. That's best left for me and the Boswells and the Mexicans. I could leave, but I won't. The Mexicans come up from down south. They don't find much rewards when they get here. One of these days, they're going to come off those fields after us, me and the Boswells. Selenium, Rossi said. Poison, some kind of chemistry. This was pretty a country as anybody ever saw, with grasslands and flowers in the spring, and that big lake with redhead ducks and canvasbacks. Don't see those anymore. Blue herons and sandhill cranes, they're gone. So you got out of politics? Went sane, Rossi said. But I kept thinking I should have gone back after the bastards instead of quitting like a chicken. Stay at it long enough and you'll turn into a purebred bastard, Ben Ambler said. That's what it looks like. The best ones go sour and get out early. We better load up that horse and send you on your way. The road to Montana was 4 days on interstate highways. Rossi had it timed so Eliza would be home from Hawaii on the same afternoon as his return. And indeed, she was down to greet him when he came driving in through the dusty twilight to pull up in front of his cork-floored barn in the tail feather field. Without a word of hello, except for her look, she came to help him let down the tailgate. Anyway, Rossi said, he's yours, for you to ride on, smartest horse you ever saw. He's yours, and for nobody else. Together, they unloaded the blue horse into a corral where he'd once upon a time been introduced to Rossi and roping. Horses, Rossi said, grinning at Eliza as if he was echoing some country song, look good on you. Her face lit up, and why not? He'd meant it and saw she was pleased. Thank you.
Welcome back for the second part of this evening's program. As in past years, our festival this year coincides with National Banned Books Week. Now, I don't understand that. Let me join with countless other organizations and individuals, particularly in the library community, in urging you to read a banned book. Our freedoms are like our muscles. In order to maintain strength and health, they need to be exercised vigorously. Every year I like to recognize the writer who's come the farthest to attend this festival. And the winner this year is Luc Long, who's come to us from Paris, France. Courtesy of the Cultural Service of the French Embassy, and with the cooperation of the Alliance Française in New York and Missoula. And Luc, we're very happy to have you here. If any of you read French, you need to get yourself a copy of his book, 9/11 Mon Amour. I recommend it. It comes from the 2001 Montana Festival of the Book. Secondly, I want to notice that NewWest.net is covering the festival for us. If you're into blogging and podcasting and things of that sort, I haven't turned my computer on since yesterday. You can find coverage of the festival on NewWest.net, and we very much appreciate their attention. It's my pleasure now to introduce Lois Welch, Professor and Chair Emerita of the Department of English at the University of Montana, for many years Director of its creative writing program, and the wife of the late James Welch, who will introduce Ivan Doig. Lois Welch.
Last week, the tallest woman in the Montana legislature asked me if I were going to introduce anyone at this year's book festival. Yes, I said, Ivan Doig, and I'm a bit nervous. You shouldn't be, which she said with some enthusiasm. He's a wonderful person. I love his books. My husband has given me every new book he writes, and he's always so nice when I get them signed. Indeed, I agreed. I'm just nervous, not afraid. He's been a good friend for many years. My problem is to do an introduction that isn't a lecture. I could go on and on. I won't, I promise. I won't even go on as long as David Duncan. If I were Ivan doing this introduction, I'd haul a couple of 4x6 file cards out of my jacket pocket and launch in. It's such a characteristic gesture but they don't make women's jackets with a pocket there. Actually, Ivan needs no introduction. At least 80% of you, and I can't see any of you, but I know you're there. At least 80% of you probably know his work already. Half of you have bought or will buy within the next 24 hours his wonderful new book, The Whistling Season. He will sign with a smile. Now, the purpose of an introduction is to recontextualize the speaker and to heighten your anticipation. Call it delayed gratification. Introductions are the original no listener left behind act. I regret to announce that we are now, in these 9/11 days, obliged to make you fill out a brief comprehension quiz before you leave. The pencils will be distributed when the lights go up. I'm kidding, of course. The facts about Ivan Doig are well known. They're printed in your program, but I'll bet you haven't read them. He was born and raised in the country around White Sulphur Springs. Yes. Beyond the Big Belt Mountains, east of Helena, and west of the Little Belts. An avid reader like the narrator in Whistling Season, Ivan worked summers as a ranch hand, but yearned, to put it mildly, to go off to college, and did, majoring in broadcast journalism. Then he wrote for newspapers and edited a magazine. And not one of us has done our research, I'm willing to wager. Not one of us has checked out the Rotarian, the editions of it that he did edit. He met and married a fellow journalism student from New Jersey, Carol, who now accompanies his note-taking with her camera. They moved west to Seattle, and Ivan got a PhD in history from the University of Washington. He had decided to be a writer when he was in high school. PhD in hand, he opted for the typewriter for full time. He's worn out more than one computer, of course, since then. Recognition has grown and grown. Recently, he was honored with the Lifetime Distinguished Achievement Award from the Western Lead Association. Among his many other awards, he also counts a Montana Governor's Award from 1996. Our first encounter, Jim's and mine, with the Doigs, was in Bill Kittredge's jam-packed living room in the spring of 1979, if memory serves me right. At the reception for that first and fateful Who Owns the West conference, where we also met Bud Guthrie and his Carol, and Norman McLean. Our lives were arranged in parallel fashion, it turned out. Carol taught college, I taught college. She had a 5-minute commute, mine was 7. Our husbands stayed home and wrote. Both Jim and Ivan offered the same advice to aspiring writers who wondered how to make a living at writing. They said, marry someone with a steady job. There the parallels diverge. Jim was claustrophobic, hated libraries. Ivan is claustrophilic and can't get enough of them. Trail Ivan out of town and you'll find him at the Montana Historical Society archives in Helena as soon as they open. If you say anything remotely interesting, he'll whip out the notebook in his left shirt pocket and write it down. Ivan's remarkable combination of historical insight, even historical intuition, and his love of language have combined with an indefatigable capacity for work to make him one of the reigning masters of Western lit, as book jackets put it. How lucky we are tonight to have these two live ones on stage together in Missoula. We recall how Ivan burst upon our scene with his House of Sky in 1978. One gasps still at its opening line. Soon before daybreak on my 6th birthday, My mother's breathing wheezed more raggedly than ever, then quieted, and then stopped. The remembering begins out of that new silence. Out of that silence, every couple of years, Ivan has offered us a new exploration of early 20th century life in that big and hard and glorious country he knows so well. English Creek in '84, Dancing at the Rascal Fair in '87, Ride With Me Maria Montana in 1990, Hard Earth, Bucking the Sun, Mountain Time, Prairie Nocturne in 2003, and now The Whistling Season. The narrator of this wonderful new novel is probably closest to the author, loving school, Latin especially, hoping to break away from a future of ranch work. As Ivan says in an interview, his narrator, Paul, eavesdrops with his eyes and admits to a bit of a pedantic streak. Somewhere Ivan wrote of a landscape out in that country, remembered in a Rembrandt light. On this exquisite September day, his precision seems apt again. Proust said that one can only imagine that which is absent. And history, of course, consists only of absence. And Ivan has managed over and over the feat of imagining compelling characters and lives from the tantalizing traces of a past at the margins of our memory, in the corner of our eyes, as it were. A final note, if you will excuse the indulgence. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, I received an email from a friend in France telling me that my Jim's picture is hanging on a wall of American masters between Hemingway and Melville at the Festival America, a book festival opening today outside Paris. And here I am on stage, sandwiched between these two living masters of American literature. So it is with a light heart and a good bit of admiration that I ask you to welcome my friend, the wonderful author, Ivan Doig.
Years back, when I was only a few books into this imprecise career path of being a wandering word minstrel from this great state who kept on wandering, one of the many, many Montanans who helped me out with the research I needed for my writing was an unlikely friend named Stan Davison. Stan taught Western history at the college in Dillon practically forever. And in person, he could have given Garrison Keeler's Norwegian bachelor farmers lessons in the bashful single life. In his retirement, when I met him, Stan was still living with his mother. What an example of Montana grit it was then. The day he spotted Carol and me in pursuit of something in a library out here. Came over, fumbled off his Dillon John Deere dealership tractor cap in deference to Carol. Said if I ever wanted any help in Montana history, he'd be glad to pitch in. He did so very fruitfully for me, and when I sent Stan Davison a copy of English Creek, in thanks for the spots of research he'd contributed, back came a very small note from Dillon, saying simply, "A gift is not less appreciated just because it is undeserved." Tonight here, in the company of Lois and Bill, I truly grasp those words. What an unforeseen and unearnable gift it has been for Carol and me to have nearly 3 decades now of Missoula friendship and good times with Lois Welch, Blessed Jim, gratefully enshrined in France today, and with Bill and Onig. Now I better try to at least earn my keep with the festival by doing some reading. Mark did surprise me. I didn't know the banned books announcement. My banned book also happens to be my best-selling book before the whistling season, and it's Dancing at the Rascal Fair, banned in Coeur d'Alene in the schools there. Well, we'll see what they think of this one. The whistling season centers on a one-room school a few months before Halley's Comet, which emblazoned the heavens in 1910. This school, 36 students in 8 grades, is the center, the heartbeat, I think the soul of a rural neighborhood of dryland homesteads in a locale I've named Marias Coulee. If it existed, it would be up there somewhere between Cutbank and Valier. The voice of this book, Paul Milliron, is a bright 7th grader at Marias Coulee School, narrating from considerably later in life. Paul has a pair of brothers, you'll hear from here. Damon, the brother just younger than Paul, is in the 6th grade, and as you'll hear, Damon is a bit of an operator. Crafty, kind of sibling you wouldn't trade the world for. You probably wouldn't want more than one of you. Toby, 2nd grader, is exuberance personified. He roars around the homestead with her dog Houdini. I suppose as the author of Houdini, I'm responsible for the fact that Houdini has only one trick. Whenever he is asked what he thinks of the current resident of the White House, and that's William Howard Taft at the time, of course, Houdini lets out a howl, rolls over, and plays dead. Accompanied by Houdini, though, whenever anybody asks Paul's brother, Toby, the little one, that eternal boring question, how is school? Toby's eyes light up and he yelps back perfectly happy, I have perfect attendance. Well, the plot gets underway when the Milliron boys' father, Oliver, a fairly recent widower, gives up in despair, trying to run the household and his homestead both. Hires sight unseen, a housekeeper in Minneapolis who has run an ad in weekly papers out here, advertising her skills under the headline, can't cook but doesn't bite. When she arrives, Rose Llewellyn indeed proves to be a paragon of housekeeping, and on her first inspection of the mussy bachelor Milliron domain, declares to them her guide word in life, upkeep. That's every secret of a pleasant household, regular upkeep. As Paul observes, what he and the other males in the household have been used to is probably better described as downkeep. Rose's appearance on the scene sends everyone's spirits up. With her arrival, they're all freed from various chores they've been doing on the homestead. Among other things, Rose has agreed with the stipulation that housekeeping in Montana can include milking the cow. So they're liberated from the milk pail, for instance, and 3 boys ride off to school that first day of the new housekeeping regime in high hopes. Across the crisp grass of autumn, Toby and Damon and I spurred our horses with a verve we hadn't had since before Mother left our lives. Great gains came seldom in our experience, but we could already count hours up since Rose's arousing knock on the door a mere hour ago. But that afternoon at recess, I slugged Eddie Turley. As I said elsewhere in the book, just sitting at his desk there in the Marias Coulee School, the big 8th grader Eddie Turley looked like a menace to society. Paul gets in the one punch on him, earns everlasting schoolyard fame as One Punch Milliron. Damon holds Paul back from further misadventure while the Swede boys hold back his astounded and enraged opponent, Paul again. My immediate adversary now was not Eddie Turley, but my brother. In the strictest sense, Damon and I saw eye to eye. He had caught up to me in height, validating, in his own mind at least, his passion for every kind of sports over my bookishness. Now he had me in a lasso-like armhole across my chest. If I hadn't been so mad, it should have occurred to me what I was in for from Eddie Turley if even Damon could so easily handle me. Our faces nearly touched as we traded savage whispers. "Have you gone crazy? He's too much for you, Paul." "I don't care. I'm through taking it about the housekeeper." "What'd he say?" "He asked me if she fed us from her tip for breakfast." "Why didn't you hit him harder?" "Thanks all to hell, Damon." Damon takes over, tells Paul he knows how to get Eddie off the notion of beating the jelly out of him, struts off to parley with the other side. Eddie was staring blue murder at me, and for that matter at Damon. He had the right pedigree for it. Ambrose Turley hunted wolves and coyotes for a livelihood. He and Eddie lived not much better than beasts themselves in a ramshackle place in the Marias River bottomland. People went out of their way to leave Brose Turley alone as he scavenged the countryside, setting traps and collecting pelts. His nearly man-sized son looked perfectly capable of collecting mine. Damon points out that Eddie is so much bigger than Paul, a fistfight wouldn't be fair. But Paul will be more than happy to take him on another way. Damon says, "Paul will race you, horseback." Eddie sneered. "That the best you can do? Any sissy can sit on a horse." Damon had him where he wanted him. With a wicked grin, he specified, "Wrong end, too." Which one of us had come up with riding backward in the saddle in our constant races with each other? I can't really prove, but my money would be on Damon. It broke the monotony of the ride to and from school. For a few years there, in good weather, my gamesman brother and I pretty much rode daily doubles against each other. Whoever lost in the first gallop only had to say, "Wrong end too this time," and off we shot again, crazy jockeys clinging atop the horse's hindquarters. Now that the bulk of age is on me, I can barely imagine ever being that nimble in the saddle, shucking out of the stirrups, scooting up and around on the seat of our pants, and ending up reseated as if we were going in one direction and the horse in the other. Or that my roan joker, Damon's Pinto Paint, put up with it. We didn't race wrong end two as much after Toby started going to school with us, as he didn't need any encouragement in the direction of breaking his neck. But every so often, when the three of us would reach the stretch of the road to school that couldn't be seen from any house, one or the other could not resist flinging the challenge, and the mill iron cavalry would be flying down the road, back pockets first. Damon sets the race. Naturally, the whole Marias Coulee schoolyard had to be in on it for Friday after school. And now, Friday has come. "Meet you at the cut." That was the watchword when all of us piled out of the schoolhouse at the end of that interminable day, sprinted to our saddled horses. The usual homeward group of us and the Pronto kids with the various Drobneys and Stinsons and Miles Calhoun trying to look innocently tacked on, traveled at a just fast enough clip to get ourselves out of sight before parents started looking out of windows. We didn't want to wear out my horse. Joker kept flicking his ears at all the patting and rubbing of his mane by so many strangers. We came down the gradient from the higher ground at the same time as the Turley bunch galloped in from the North Gulch they had circled around to. "The suckers," Damon said to me, confident enough for both of us. He had to be, because I wasn't so sure. I remember my heart beating at what felt like twice its normal rate, while the last few preparations for the race seemed to take forever. The excited babble of the gathering, Toby was letting loose everything he'd had to save up all day in school, reached me only dimly. The Gumbo Hill up from our place breaks off into an eroded clay bank area where the road runs flat and straight for about half a mile before climbing again to the bench country. This was the cut, It was the ground I had known as long as anything in my life, and its bare, beaten dirt looked as foreign and forbidding to me at that suspended moment in time as the Sahara. Finally, the Crackter brothers, the last of us, and with the most roundabout route to sneak past nosy parents, came spurring madly in from the river end of the coulee. Damon got things underway. We have to make it fast before somebody comes along. Martin, he asked Eddie's main adherent, is Eddie ready to eat dust? For answer, Eddie stomped up to the starting line leading his snorty, high-shouldered mount. That horse looked like it could step over the top of Joker and me. The terrible taste of doubt nearly did me in. I must admit, I was within the tip of my tongue saying uncle, finding some wild excuse to forfeit the race. But that would doom me at school even worse than losing to Eddie. And the dreams that would beset me. I gave Joker a last pat and led him out onto the road past Eddie's big steel gray horse. There we stood, at the line scratched in the dirt. Eddie always wore one of Brose Turley's old hats that seemed to have been fashioned out of the dried skin of some major beast. I pulled my mail-ordered Junior Stetson lower over my eyes, tried to concentrate on the road ahead. The racetrack, to call it that, stretched from the starting line to a single marker, distant and shining in the middle of the road. Here was where the genius of Damon came in again. At his insistence, the course was a loop, the far end of the cut and back. Flat out here to there, Martin Murdahl understandably had tried to hold out for when the two sides were negotiating the ground rules. A horse the size of the Steel Gray could build a lot of velocity when simply aimed straight ahead. Damon had been pitiless. What? Eddie can't steer that cayuse of his around any kind of a corner? I'll race your squirt brother around in circles if that's what it takes, Eddie blurted, snapping up the bait. Most of us carried small lard pails as lunch buckets, and Damon and Martin now had stacked several of those with a rock in each for stability until they made a silver pillar there in the middle of the road. I understood why Damon demanded the momentum-breaking marker, but I still fretted about it. Rounding it, if the horses were close together, would be no easy stunt. On the other hand, if the Steel Gray was half a dozen horse lengths ahead of Joker by then, traffic at the marker was going to be the least of my problems, wasn't it? Damon and Martin stepped forth to hold the bridles of our horses. The more or less neutral 8th grader Verl Fletcher had been picked to be the race caller. Everybody back, give them room, he directed. There was a collective groan of saddle leather as 30 horseback school children moved off into the badland cut banks on either side to spectate. Riders up, Verl called. Eddie was watching me from the corner of his eye, and I was doing the same to him. It hit me. He wanted me to be the first to get up there backward in the saddle so he could see how. Planted myself like a post till Verl said to us, "You gonna ride him or walk him?" Eddie lost patience, stuck his other foot than usual into the stirrup, and with a mighty grunt heaved himself upward toward his horse's rump, barely clearing the peril of the saddle horn as he wishboned over. Then fell around behind him like a blind man for the reins Martin was attempting to hand to him. I swung into my saddle the right way, took control of Joker's reins, then shucked the stirrups, scooted around on my fanny, so I too was established in the leather basin of the saddle, wrong end too. Eddie glared across at me as if I had just shaken a ballet tutu in his face. Damon rose on tiptoe beside Joker's mane to ecstatically whisper up to me, "He hasn't practiced. The dope. Can you believe it? Damon, that horse of his doesn't need any practice," I whispered back. "You worry too much," Damon assured me. "Gonna give you a count of 3, Verl let us know. Those next moments have stayed with me with the clarity of a clock face. My belt buckle brushed against the cantle of the saddle as I leaned in the direction of Joker's flanks. The reins were wrapped double around my right hand, held as far behind me as I could reach, so as not to tug on the bit of the bridle differently than Joker was used to. "One!" Vernal chanted. There was not a sound from the entire mounted legion of Marias Cooley's school, from either Eddie's adherents or mine. Clans of centaurs must have watched with similar appraisal when match races were run in the groves of Peloponnesus. 2! Joker's tensed ears were sharpened to a point now, and probably mine were too. 3! Spur 'em! Eddie was the only one dressed for that, sporting a pair of silver jingle bobs, sharp as can openers, that likely were everyday equipment in the Turley family business of encouraging saddle horses to run down wolves. The first jab of those spurs commanded the Steel Gray's attention, definitely, but not quite as Eddie had intended. The big horse hurtled into action, shying right and left, fishtailing down the road as it tried to figure out the wishes of the unbalanced rider on its back. Nor was Eddie the master of handling reins behind his back yet. Joker and I managed a perfectly nice, orderly start, and I pressed my shoe heels against his rib cage, gave the reins the flick he recognized. But it didn't do us any immediate good. Whatever lane of the road we tried, there was a wall of gray horse in our way. One instant, the veering rump of the thing, the next, practically a sideways view of Eddie as he tried simultaneously to stay upright and saw his horses ahead around to the right direction with that reverse grip on the reins. Over the hoofbeats and horse snorts, I could hear cheering and shouts of equestrian advice from the onlookers up on their vantage points in the Badlands, but none of it registered long enough to last. When I wasn't having to keep an eye on Eddie's galloping wrestle with his horse, I was aware only of the road flying at uncommon speed beneath me. It is surprising how near the hard ground seems when there's only a horse's tail between you and it. Time whirled away like our dust. As well as I could judge ahead over my shoulder, we're about to reach the halfway point of the cut. By that stage of the race, Steel Gray had covered at least twice as much road as Joker and I, but we were able to catch up to within a length every time it made one of its sideway veers. Apparently, though, that grizzled mass of horseflesh could hurl along like this all day long. I collected my wits, at least those that hadn't been shaken out of me by the jolts that come from riding backwards in the saddle. It was time to make the one maneuver I was capable of. Then or never. Maybe it was already too late. Damon had worked this out with me, of course. Don't let him see how to use the cantle until you have to, my brother, the race promoter, had counseled. Pretty good chance old Eddie won't have brains enough to figure it out for himself first. So, till right then, I had stayed more or less upright in the saddle, the same jouncing way Eddie was, both of us loosey-goosey in the seat as we held on to stirrup leather or saddle strings or whatever we could find to grab in the absence of the usual saddle horn. Now, though, when Eddie's horse made another of its spook tangents toward the far side of the road and Joker was able to close the gap just enough, I dropped down lower than any jockey, grabbed the curved back of the saddle frame in a bear hug with my left arm. I'd be lying if I said the cantle was the most appealing thing I ever hugged in my life, but right then it served its purpose. As one or another of us, probably the natural daredevil Toby, had discovered in our wrong end 2 races. If you bent over far enough, the width of the cantle steadied the base of your chest. Swooping up hip pocket high on a person sitting the normal way of the saddle, it provided something substantial to hug onto. This move greatly streamlined matters for the horse. The crouched over jockey now atop him, albeit one tucked in not the usual direction, Joker gained some more on the skittering Steel Gray. Eddie had his hands full with just his horse. The concept of affection for his saddle cantle must have been far beyond him. Yet there I was, clinging secure as a cockleburr on the back of my horse, while the back of Eddie's was like a hurricane deck. Worse, surely, was the realization that Joker was steadily sneaking up every time his hard-to-rein steed careened across the road. By now, we were were thundering down on the turn marker, the pillar of pails. The view over my shoulder told me what I already knew. The road was not wide enough for both horses to make the turn at the same time. Here, the advantage went back to Eddie. The way the steel gray rocketed back and forth across our course anyway, Eddie only had to make sure the horse kept going a little farther than usual in its next veer in front of Joker and me, and rein it around hard to loop it into the turn. All I could do was try to keep us from getting run over by the gray, try to catch up after the turn somehow. Joker was just far enough behind the other horse that I saw the flash of motion as Eddie set to work on shouldering into our way. He did what riders like the Turleys do on brawny, hard-mouthed horses. He resorted to his spurs. As Damon had told me, I could have told him, spurs actually are not the best idea when riding wrong end two. When you think about it, if your heels are in the vicinity of the horse's shoulders, where your toes usually are, the rowels of your spurs are going to hit the horse up front there in the withers, aren't they? Rather than where he expects it, in the flanks. Eddie must have jabbed in an off-balance way, too, raking his horse more sharply on the off shoulder. The big gray animal flinched away from Eddie's intended direction and abruptly angled off the opposite way, straight into the turn pillar. There was a tinny thunder as the steel gray breasted through the stack of metal, and it rained lunch pails. Ducking, I let Joker gallop on past where the pails were clattering down, then tugged hard left on the reins. Joker did not manage to make a sharp turn of it, puffing around like a laborious imitation of a cutting horse. But at least we were eventually turned and heading back down the course toward the finish line. That was more than could be said for our opposition. What an advantage riding backward in the saddle provided at that moment. I had a perfect view of Eddie bouncing away into the Badlands as his horse kept going and going. The clay bank formations there north of the cut gradually fell away into a maze of eroded shapes that in a mile or so reached the Marias River. The runaway steel gray showed every sign of taking Eddie for a swim. And Joker raced on solo till I checked ahead, saw Verl waving his arms and yelling, "Eddie flubbed the turn! Paul wins!" Other shouts and hoots and whoops of congratulation filled the air as everyone headed their horses down onto the road for a better look at Eddie's situation. By the time I hauled Joker to a halt, got myself right side around in the saddle, Damon and Toby were beside me, each more giddy than the other over my victory. And we watched together as the steel gray disappeared behind the mudstone hump. When it emerged on the other side, the saddle on its back was empty. None of us were as concerned as we maybe should have been. If wolf packs could not do the Turleys in, surely they were impervious to the lesser threat of horses and humans, our line of thinking ran. Still, the entire Marias Coulee school body plunged into the Badlands in a loose cavalry charge to the aid of Eddie. Before we could get there, he came limping out from behind the mudstone, shirt torn, hat gone, chin a little bloody, scrapes on every patch of skin that we could see. "This backwards stuff," he complained as we rode up, "is harder than it looks."
It's harder than it looks, but some people make it sound easy. Thank you, Ivan. I should add that Mr. Doig also will appear tomorrow morning with former MCH Director Margaret Kingsland for a discussion of our 2006 One Book Montana selection, This House of Sky. Before we close, I want to recognize one more person important on our team, radio producer and personality Lenny Holloman, who produces our Montana Festival book series on Montana Public Radio. Lenny is the voice of the festival that most people in Montana recognize, and we very much appreciate her work for us. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, and good night.